Nancy stood on tiptoes to look searchingly over the crowd of heads as they gathered in the foyer. The Avis History Museum was bigger than it had any business being. Local historians prowled the hallways in search of stragglers to bore to death with dates and artifacts, and entire rooms, bigger than Nancy's own home, were dedicated to skeletons of people they hadn't even identified. The namesake of the town had been burned at the stake, so that teenagers and their over-enthusiastic teachers could ooh and ah at a singed stump of wood every few years. She rolled back onto her heels and leaned against a display case of mummified rabbits. The new girl was looking at the displays, and Nancy had no intention of pretending to be friends, even after their Halloween exploits the month prior. The prosecution of Avis Webb was the last recorded event in Lockford before the storm that flooded the town and killed the entire population. The town records were held in Whitney after the Lockford Town Hall was destroyed by fire 50 years prior. For this reason, there are only 50 years of events recorded for our research. And yet they've filled 12 rooms, Nancy muttered to herself. For hundreds of years, the remains of the town were buried beneath the ground you're standing on today, and which our entire town is built. Not until the early 20s was the town rebuilt and named after old Avis Webb. Hi! Nancy cocked an eyebrow at the new girl and pulled her sunglasses down from the top of her head to cover her overly made-up eyes. Hi, she replied. Both girls had barely been sleeping and recognized the same look of exhaustion in each other. Nightmares full of grinning teeth and frantic eyes. Screaming and laughing had plagued every night, until trying to sleep seemed counterproductive. Better to limit strenuous activity in the day and just accept that any quality of sleep would be at the end of a long book or a Hitchcock marathon, when your head drops and you slip into REM before the ghouls notice. It was a haunting. They had the same dream. That thing in the woods had seen them as much as they had seen it, and now it wanted to play. "So, Avis Webb," said Ellie. "Yeah, welcome to Avis. Look forward to hearing about this shit often. You know, you swear a lot. My mum would. We're not friends. Did you think we were friends? Because we're not." Nancy walked away, felt her head spin and saw stars, collapsed and woke up on the bus. It was a 5-minute journey through the woods from the school to reach the museum, built over the site of Avis Webb's former home, where they discovered the skeleton of the grey bird and the rabbits she used to make wool bags. The walk would have taken 15 minutes, but the school principal paid out for a bus every year after Lucy Ingram went missing, presumed to have wandered off the path when no one was looking. Nancy leaned her head on the seat in front, took a sobering breath and finally made eye contact with Miss Post. "I've been calling your house. Is your mum working again?" Her head was pounding. She didn't want to talk about home. "Yeah," she replied. "I can drive you home when we get back to school." "No thanks, I can walk." "You don't have a fever, but you don't look good." "I'm on my period." "Ah, well, that can happen. You sure you're all right?" "Yeah," she replied again and turned to look out the window. The other children were walking in orderly lines back to the bus, some holding gift shop bags filled with rabbit wool purses and little ceramic replicas of the burning stump. Nancy had her own, on her desk at home, from her first visit to the museum. The drive back to the school was brief and uneventful. They climbed down from the bus in the car park where parents were waiting to collect their little ones. No one walked home in Avis these days, at least no one ever made it home by themselves. Some parents looked exhausted, dark shadows under their eyes, twitchy, frantic hands rushing their kids into their cars. Nancy dipped behind the bus and set off in the direction of home along Yew Tree Lane. She heard the calls from the forest, crunching of twigs and stones underfoot. She thought she heard laughing, but it could be travelling from the school. A crumpled pile of white paper was creeping along the ground, blown forward by the wind. Every now and then it would flip over and show half of Mark Bailey's face on a weathered missing persons poster. They made separate posters for all of them, so that for the last month the town had looked like a scene out of some Stephen King adaptation. Nancy continued walking with her paper companion rustling along a little in front. The wind felt like waves, building up and flowing over her, starting a frenzy of dancing leaves and twigs in the forest behind her. "And when thou goest on thy way," she started to recite, then stopped herself quickly. "Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry? Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to?" She filled her mouth with the first song that came to mind, anything to keep out that creeping mantra. She walked quicker now, aware of the eyes between the trees, ducking her head down and raising her shoulders up, the sound of the rustling and the wind suddenly too much to bear. Arriving at home, she slowly closed the door, trying to make as little noise as possible. The floorboards seemed to be calling to her parents with every step. "She's home, she's home, she's home." They called until she got to her room and closed the door. She got her Walkman from her desk and lay down on her bed with the headphones in. Madonna told her to dance, and she let her eyes drift shut. Her body got very heavy, and the bed accepted her weight, swallowing her up and letting her sleep. The CD ended, and the storm that was rattling around the house brought her back to consciousness, rain spattering the window and thunder sending shudders through the walls. She got to her feet and listened, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The room was dark. Perhaps it was gone 9 o'clock. Had she gone another whole day without eating anything? She peered out the window and barely made out the traffic on the main road out of Avis before another shower of rain hit the glass. The floorboards creaked again, like someone pacing in the hall. She had been torturing herself over what to do with them for days. More than once she had decided just running away was the answer, leaving town, changing her name and starting afresh. But every time she thought of them, in the dark, alone and calling for her, she couldn't bear it. So she had decided to burn them. It was the only real option. Not today, though, not with the rain like this. She'd never be able to start a fire. The knocking began. That incessant knocking and the rattling of the padlock, the creak in the hall. "Okay," she said, and opened the door. At the far end of the hall, outside her parents' room, was a blanket box they used to keep the towels in. The towels, drenched in blood, were littered around it. The lid lifted half an inch and rattled the cindy padlock that held it shut. It closed again, then opened that half inch. Some blooded, gnawed fingers poked out, then vanished back into the darkness of the box. Nancy walked towards it as if carried by a wave, out of the vast and tragic sea. She let herself be carried and focused on fighting back the tears that boiled behind her eyes and made her face feel like fire. She fell to her knees beside the box and leant her forehead against its lid. "I'm sorry," she said. "Nancy, darling, open the box." "No," she cried, her shoulders shaking. "It's very tight in here for your dad and me. I think my back is broken and my eye. There's something sharp in my eye. Your dad's a right mess, love. I can barely recognize him. Not that I can see much in here. It's very dark. Please, darling, let us out. You're dead. I've got maggots crawling around in my eye sockets. My skin is grey. There's no blood left. I think I'm decomposing. I'm going to drag the blanket box out into the garden and set it on fire tomorrow. Then you'll be gone and you won't be in pain anymore. Please just be quiet till then." "Be quiet? With your dad's snapped collarbone poking me in the eye? We're all twisted up in here, Nancy. It hurts. It really hurts, Nancy, please." "It'll be worse if I let you out," she screamed, and the box started to shake and rattle again. Nancy stood back up and kicked the box. "I went in the woods at Halloween. I gave the offering. What did you do? You did something. You did something so you're... It hurts. It hurts. It hurts," they called from the box, and she covered her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut and sang to block out the sound of their cries. It had started a week before Halloween. Little signs of self-harm. It culminated in a fight in the kitchen, Nancy trying to pull a knife from her mother's hands as she repeatedly stabbed herself in the stomach. Her dad had already hung himself, swinging from the banisters, bulging broken neck and hideous grin, shaking in glee from the pain. She picked up the phone when they both stopped moving, but they started again. They started tearing chunks out of each other, out of themselves. She forced them into the blanket box to keep them from knives, from broken cups, from knitting needles. "I hate you both," she cried and walked down the stairs. The sound of them shuffling and crying was matched by the sound of the storm, the billowing of the wind that rattled all of the doors and windows, that felt as though it were just above the house. Nancy opened the front door and stepped out into the street. It was raining hard now, drenching her in seconds and wiping away her makeup. Her pulse in her ears was deafening, her tears mingling with the water on her face. She hadn't realized she was walking away from the house until the car struck her. She tumbled like a sack of potatoes into a heap of blood and broken bones on the ground. Someone got out of the car and ran towards her, but she didn't see or hear them. Everything was silence now. Silence and the sound of that blanket box rattling against the padlock.